They're not evil, but they'll destroy you. You trust your instincts. You think you'd know if someone was dangerous. If they yelled, hit, betrayed, sure, you'd walk away. But what if the most dangerous people don't shout? What if they speak in soft tones, look at you with kind eyes, and make you feel like the most important person in the room, while slowly, invisibly, pulling you into a psychological battlefield? Carl Jung never warned us about overt villains. He warned us about the charming ones, the unaware ones. The ones with soft wounds and heavy shadows, so heavy that they have to place them somewhere, and that somewhere is you. This video isn't a list of toxic traits. It's a mirror. Because the 6 most dangerous psychological profiles Jung described might already be in your life, in your family, in your friendships, in your bed. And the scariest part? You might be one of them and not even know it. Take a deep breath, we're going in. You think you'd recognize danger, that your body would flinch, your mind would sense it. Maybe you imagine danger looks loud, like aggression, cruelty, betrayal. But what if it looks like affection? What if it sounds like laughter? Or the soft, familiar voice of someone who says they only want what's best for you? Jung warned us that the most destructive people don't come wearing villain costumes. They wear masks that even they believe. They're polite. They're generous. Sometimes they're even part of your bloodline, and that's exactly what makes them so dangerous. Because while you're busy protecting yourself from the obvious, the jealous ex, the toxic boss, the angry parent, you leave your psyche wide, open to the subtle invaders, those who smile, while handing you their pain to carry. Picture this. You spend time with someone and leave feeling strangely tired, not physically, but emotionally depleted, like some invisible weight just attached itself to your shoulders. You can't name what happened. They didn't do anything wrong, but somehow you feel smaller, less grounded, less you. That's not just a bad vibe. That's a psychological signal. It means you've just absorbed something that wasn't yours to hold. Carl Jung spent his life studying these unconscious transactions, moments where one person's shadow leaks into the life of another. In his book, The Ego and the Unconscious, he wrote that the true forces shaping our behaviors don't live in awareness, they live beneath it. And what remains unconscious becomes projected. That's where the danger lies, not in those who intend harm, but in those who are blind to the harm they cause because they're blind to themselves. When someone refuses to meet their own shadow, it doesn't disappear. It searches for a host. And often, it finds you. It's easy to feel immune, especially if you're empathetic, emotionally intelligent, self-aware. But Jung would argue, it's precisely people like you who are most vulnerable. Why? Because you believe in compassion. You look for the good. You try to understand. And in doing so, you unconsciously open a door that says, here. You can project here. You can unload here. I'll carry it. You didn't mean to. But your sensitivity became a magnet. And here's the twist. The real threat isn't just them. It's not only about the one projecting, manipulating, or invading. It's about what part of you allows it. That's the deeper truth Jung pointed us toward. Not just protection from others, but self-reclamation. Because until you become aware of how easily your boundaries blur, you'll keep mistaking enmeshment for empathy and emotional vampirism for love. So before we move into the 6 archetypes of danger, ask yourself, have I ever felt hollow after giving too much? Have I ever sacrificed my peace just to keep the connection? Have I ever walked away from someone and felt like I left pieces of myself behind? If the answer is yes, then this isn't just a video. It's a mirror. And what you see next might change everything. Not all manipulation is malicious. Sometimes it's disguised as vulnerability. We like to believe that if someone cries in front of us, opens up, or shares their trauma, they must be harmless, maybe even in need of protection. But here's the paradox Jung warned us about. The most destructive projections don't come from evil. They come from unprocessed pain, pain that someone refuses to own. And because they can't carry it, they hand it to you. It often starts like this. You meet someone who seems deeply sensitive. They talk about their past, their scars, the people who hurt them. You feel drawn in, not out of obligation, but out of something deeper. Empathy. You want to be the one who doesn't hurt them, the one who understands, the safe place they never had. But slowly, the relationship stops feeling mutual. You begin to notice a shift. You're not just listening, you're absorbing. You're not just caring, you're compensating. Their sadness becomes your responsibility. Their anger, somehow your fault. Their emotional storms, you feel guilty if you can't calm them. Carl Jung called this projection, a defense mechanism where a person disowns their shadow and unconsciously assigns it to someone else. From that moment on, you're no longer a person. You become a symbol, a rescuer, a disappointment, a mirror, an enemy, a fantasy. But here's the truth. None of those images are really you. They're fragments of someone else's psyche, taped onto your face. And the worst part? You don't realize. It's happening. You think you're being kind. You tell yourself, this is maturity. This is empathy. I'm being a good friend, a good partner, a good person. But the truth is, you've walked into a psychological field that isn't yours. You're not helping them heal. You're playing a role in a play you didn't audition for. You're being used, not consciously, not maliciously, but by emotional patterns so deeply buried that even they don't know they're doing it. And often, these people are incredibly charming. They're artistic, introspective, emotionally intense. That's the trap, because you think, they just need someone who gets them. I can be that person. But what you're really doing is sacrificing your own psychic health to rescue someone who refuses to rescue themselves. Jung warned that when someone projects their unconscious onto you, they don't see you anymore. They see a lost part of themselves. And they react to you, not as you are, but as a distorted memory. This is why, no matter what you do, it's never quite enough. When they're angry, it's because you provoked it. When they're sad, it's because you failed them. When they feel inferior, it's because you must think you're better. The distortion is so subtle. You start questioning yourself. Was I too harsh? Did I say something wrong? Am I the toxic one here? And just like that, manipulation occurs without a scream being heard, without a single command being spoken. This is the power of the unconscious manipulator. They never mean to harm you. They may even love you in their own way. But love without self-awareness isn't intimacy, it's dependency. It's enmeshment. It's drowning together while calling it connection. The only way out? Awareness. Recognize the pattern. Cut the invisible cords that tie you to their emotional scripts. And ask yourself, every single day, is what I'm feeling truly mine? Or is it something I've been trained to carry? Because unconscious manipulators don't break into your mind violently. They enter through the softest part of you, your empathy. And once inside, they settle in. Unless you wake up. Imagine this. You're standing on a stage you didn't choose under a spotlight you never asked for. A script is handed to you, except it's invisible. You don't even realize you're performing until your piece starts unraveling. This is what happens when you enter the life of an unconscious manipulator. They don't yell, they don't scheme. They don't even know they're doing it. But you start shrinking. At first, they seem fragile, sensitive, deep. They open up to you, cry in front of you, confide in you. It feels sacred, like you've been entrusted with a soul. You tell yourself, they've been hurt. They just need someone stable. But soon you notice, your emotional center is no longer yours. You're constantly regulating their feelings, walking on eggshells, avoiding topics, softening your truth. You're no longer speaking freely. You're filtering everything through the fear of triggering them. And here's the subtle horror. You think you're being mature. You think this is what love looks like. But in truth, you're disappearing. Carl Jung warned about this dynamic through the concept of projection. When someone refuses to meet their inner chaos, they unconsciously turn you into the canvas for it. They don't see you. They see the part of themselves they've buried. And then, they blame it, attack it, adore it, idealize it, as if that part were real. as if you were the enemy, or the savior, or the parent they never had. But you're none of those things. You're just there, caught in a story that was written long before you showed up. The unconscious manipulator doesn't scream at you. They reshape you. Slowly, gently, relentlessly. Their pain becomes your duty. Their disappointment becomes your guilt. Their silence becomes a test you're desperate to pass. And because there's no obvious abuse, no shouting, no control, no force, you don't even realize it's manipulation. But it is. It's emotional outsourcing. They're outsourcing the labor of their healing onto you. And the more you give, the more they need. The more they lean, the more you bend. Until one day you wake up and realize you no longer recognize yourself in the mirror. You've become a character in someone else's psychological script. You weren't chosen for who you are. You were chosen for how well you fit their unresolved narrative. And that is not love. That is psychic consumption. The irony? They may seem like the victim. They may even believe they're the one being hurt. That you're the cold one. That you changed. But what really happened is that you started to see the strings, the roles, the patterns. And the moment you start naming them, you stop being useful to the game. So how do you escape? You stop playing the part. You stop carrying pain that isn't yours. You stop confusing empathy with emotional servitude. You begin to ask the only question that matters. Is this love, or is this an unpaid role in someone else's healing? The next part, we'll meet a new figure. One who wears a different kind of mask. Not fragile, but flawless. The one who doesn't project pain. They perform perfection, until it infects you too. Not all psychological danger comes from chaos. Sometimes it comes dressed in absolute control. The next type Carl Jung warned us about isn't emotionally explosive. They're composed, disciplined, flawless. They say the right things, smile at the right times, respond exactly as society expects. But beneath the polished image is a soul slowly suffocating. This is the bearer of the persona, the one who no longer remembers where the mask ends and the self begins. At first you might admire them. They seem admirable, professional, elegant, well-spoken. They're everything the world applauds. But spend enough time around them and something feels hollow. Conversations lack depth. Moments feel rehearsed. There's a quiet tension, like you're always on stage, even in private. You laugh, but it feels shallow. You speak, but censor yourself, because the persona they wear doesn't just shape them. It shapes the entire room. Jung described the persona as the social mask we all wear. And to some degree, it's necessary. We become teachers, friends, leaders, parents. We adapt, we play roles. But the danger begins when someone believes they are the role. When identity collapses into performance. When authenticity is exiled in favor of image. And when you live beside someone like this, you don't just lose connection to them. You slowly begin losing connection to yourself. You start second-guessing your spontaneity. You tone down your emotions. You become self-conscious about your laughter, your pain, your truth. Not because they ever told you to, but because their mask demands silence. Emotion makes them uncomfortable. Vulnerability confuses them. Unpredictability threatens them. So you adapt. You become the version of yourself that fits their image of what's acceptable, and before you know it, you're wearing a mask too. What makes this dynamic so dangerous isn't abuse, it's erasure, not of your body, but of your essence. The bearer of the persona doesn't hurt you with words. They rewrite you through presence. They don't demand you change. They simply create a climate where only certain parts of you can breathe. Jung considered this identification with persona one of the greatest obstacles to individuation, the journey of becoming your full, integrated self. Because if your partner, parent, or friend is hypnotized by their role, and you become hypnotized by their approval, then no one is real anymore. Everyone's just acting, and no one knows how to stop. So how do you escape this subtle prison? You begin by recognizing, when you're self-editing, you listen for the moments when your truth shrinks in their presence. You ask yourself, am I safe here? Or am I just performing safety? Because masks may protect people from pain, but they also block love, and no one can truly love you if they never actually see you. Up next, we meet a figure even more dangerous, not because they wear a mask, but because they've buried everything real beneath it. This is the owner of the repressed shadow, the one who tries to be light until the darkness takes over. They are kind, they are composed, they never raise their voice, never lose control, never make a scene. They're the ones people admire. So calm, so balanced, so good. But spend enough time with them, and you begin to feel something strange, like there's a storm hiding just beneath the smile, a quiet intensity, a tightness in the air, and then one day, they explode. You're caught completely off guard. A small mistake becomes a personal attack. A harmless joke turns into betrayal. A simple disagreement triggers rage far beyond the moment, and you're left stunned, wondering, where did that come from? Carl Jung would answer simply, the shadow. The shadow is everything we reject about ourselves. The anger we don't admit, the envy we rationalize, the desire we label as shameful, the pain we pretend isn't there, and just because it's buried doesn't mean it's gone. Jung said, what you do not make conscious will control your life, and you will call it fate. The bearer of the repressed shadow tries to be light, all the time, polite, helpful, morally correct. They smile even when they're hurting, they suppress even when they're boiling, but the shadow doesn't die in the dark. It ferments until it erupts. These eruptions aren't random, they're disproportionate but targeted. A delayed buildup of emotion that finally finds a crack. Maybe they don't scream. Maybe they withdraw instead. Ice cold, dismissive, punishing you with silence. Or they become passively aggressive, sabotaging your efforts, criticizing without reason. And yet, everyone else sees them as kind, calm, in control. You're the only one who knows there's something wrong underneath. The tragedy is, they're not evil, they're in pain. But instead of turning inward to meet that pain, they build walls of morality around it. Walls like, I don't get angry. I don't want attention. I'm not like other people. I've evolved. But repression is not evolution. It's exile. And everything we exile becomes shadow. Everything we push away becomes a ghost inside us. Jung believed that the stronger the persona, the more dangerous the shadow it hides. Because the person who seems too perfect has often buried a lifetime of unmet needs, unspoken rage, and unlived desire. And when that shadow finally surfaces, it doesn't whisper, it screams. So what happens to you if you're close to someone who lives in denial of their darkness? You walk on landmines, you censor yourself, you flinch at tone changes, you begin to feel responsible for their emotional weather, and slowly, you internalize it. You start believing, maybe I am the problem. Maybe I am too emotional. Maybe it really is my fault. But it's not. You're not toxic. You're simply standing too close to someone who's afraid of their own reflection. The path forward isn't to rescue them. You can't drag someone into their shadow, but you can protect yourself. You can stop confusing repressed intensity with maturity. You can stop apologizing for being human. You can start noticing, why do I always feel so emotionally small around this person? Because repression isn't strength, it's suppression. And when darkness is denied, it always returns. Next, we face another mask, not of repression, but of righteousness. The moral controller, the one who weaponizes virtue to dominate your soul. Not all executioners carry swords, some carry scripture, some quote, "What's right?" Some say it's for your own good. This is the danger Jung feared most. Not the person who knows their darkness, but the one who hides it behind the illusion of light. At first glance, the moral controller seems admirable. They speak with conviction. They live by principles. They know what's right and wrong, and they'll make sure you do too. They correct you, advise you, judge you quietly, sometimes loudly, not because they hate you, but because they believe they're saving you, and that's exactly what makes them so dangerous. Jung understood that morality, when authentic, is transformative, but when used as a facade, it becomes one of the most insidious forms of psychic control. The moral controller doesn't scream, they don't explode, they preach. They make you feel that your choices are shameful, your desires are selfish, your truth is too much. What's worse, they truly believe they're doing the right thing. They're not manipulating you consciously. They're projecting their own exiled impulses onto your behavior. They condemn what they can't accept in themselves. So if they've repressed anger, they'll label your assertiveness as aggression. If they've buried their desires, they'll call your passion sinful. If they've silenced their pain, they'll call your expression dramatic. This kind of projection isn't loud, it's righteous. It wears a halo while holding a leash. You'll hear things like, "I'm just being honest." Someone has to say it. "I'm doing this because I care." But care isn't control, and honesty without compassion is just cruelty in disguise. Living near a moral controller is like being under constant surveillance. You feel judged, even when you're alone. You start editing your joy, suppressing your sadness, policing your instincts, because you've internalized their gaze, their rules, their definition of good, and soon, their morality becomes your prison. Carl Jung warned that when morality is used to avoid shadow integration, it becomes a spiritual bypass, a way to look holy while staying fractured. These individuals often position themselves as the voice of reason, the right one in the room. But inside, they're terrified of their own contradictions. So they project those contradictions onto others and punish you for embodying what they can't admit lives within them. And here's the real danger. Because their control is dressed in ethics, you feel guilty resisting it. You begin to believe that your authentic self, your messy, raw, emotional self, is wrong. Not because it is, but because it doesn't fit into their tightly controlled moral script. So how do you know you're entangled in this dynamic? You feel like you're never quite enough, no matter how hard you try. You feel watched. Even when they're silent, you shrink around them, you submit, you stay quiet. And most of all, you feel ashamed of things that used to feel natural. That is not growth. That is indoctrination. The way out? You reclaim your inner compass. You stop confusing morality with manipulation. You remind yourself, what is right for them is not always what is true for me. And most importantly, you stop apologizing for being human. Because real goodness isn't loud. It doesn't punish. It liberates. But what happens when morality fails to suppress the unconscious, and something even older, more chaotic, takes over? In the next part, we meet the one who doesn't just project or repress. They're possessed. This is the complexed. The one whose past takes the wheel, while everyone else pays the price. There's something unsettling about being close to someone whose reactions never quite match the moment. You say something small, and they shut down. You ask a simple question, and they erupt. You make a joke, and it somehow turns into a cold war. And no matter how carefully you speak, how much you clarify, how gently you approach, everything becomes a trigger. This is the realm of the complexed, a term Jung used to describe people who are not just wounded, but governed by their wounds. They don't live in the present. They relive the past, again and again projected onto whoever happens to be near. Their psyche is not whole, it's fragmented, divided into pockets of memory, pain, and emotion that never fully healed. And those fragments sometimes speak louder than their actual voice. One day they're affectionate, kind, open. The next, they're gone, distant, cold, accusing you of things that never crossed your mind. You're left dizzy. What just happened? What did I do? You retrace your steps. Try to make sense of it. Try to help. But helping someone trapped inside a complex is like speaking to a locked door and blaming yourself when it doesn't open. Jung described complexes as autonomous fragments of the psyche, like little subpersonalities born from trauma that hijack the mind and body without warning. They have their own voice, their own Emotion. Their own script. And when activated, the person no longer sees you. They see someone from their past. Their mother, their ex, their abuser, their ghost. And you? You're just standing there, holding the projection. This dynamic is profoundly destabilizing because sometimes they're wonderful. They apologize, they love you, they express regret, and just when you think, maybe it's getting better, the storm returns. That unpredictability becomes addictive. You keep chasing the good version of them. The one who was kind, the one who cared, the one who made you feel special. But here's the brutal truth. That version of them is not sustainable because it's not rooted in integration. It's an island between emotional hurricanes. Living with the complex is like living on a fault line. You never know what word, what silence, what look will shatter the ground beneath you. And over time, you start bending to prevent earthquakes. You adjust your tone. You filter your truth. You shrink, hoping your smallness will bring peace. But peace doesn't come from making yourself invisible. It comes from recognizing that their chaos is not your responsibility. Jung taught that unconscious trauma, when not faced, becomes fate. And for the complexed, that fate repeats, hurting not just themselves but everyone close to them. They aren't bad people. They are people in pain, but until they do the work to integrate, to become whole, they will continue to speak from the wound and call it love. So how do you protect yourself? You stop mistaking inconsistency for depth. You stop romanticizing chaos. You stop hoping that calm days mean the storm is gone, and you start asking, am I in love with them, or am I just trying to survive them? Up next, we'll meet the most subtle danger of all. Not loud, not explosive, not moral, but silent, clingy, draining. The one who doesn't want your heart. They want your energy. The psychic vampire. They don't yell, they don't blame, they don't explode. In fact, they seem warm, gentle, needy in a way that feels innocent. They tell you you're special. They open up quickly. They say things like, I don't know what I'd do without you, and it feels good at first, to be wanted, to be needed, until one day, you wake up feeling completely drained. This is the psychic vampire, the person who doesn't want your presence. They want your energy. They don't feed on drama or control. They feed on attention, on emotional labor, on your availability. First, it looks like love. They text all the time. They ask how you're doing. They seem deeply connected to you. But slowly, the dynamic shifts. You become their therapist, their emergency contact, their safe space, their life raft, and if you ever pull back just a little, they panic. Suddenly you're cold, different. You've changed. But all you did was breathe. Carl Jung didn't use the term psychic vampire, but he warned against symbiotic relationships, bonds where one person refuses to grow and clings to another to stay afloat. They don't want to become whole. They want to be carried, and while you're carrying them, you start disappearing. You stop having space for your own emotions. You suppress your needs because theirs always seem more urgent. You start feeling selfish for wanting silence, guilty for needing boundaries, and worst of all, you begin to believe that love is supposed to feel this exhausting. But it's not. Love supports. Symbiosis consumes. The psychic vampire isn't evil. They're just empty. And they've learned that by attaching themselves to others, they can feel full, temporarily. But their hunger returns. It always returns. And if you stay too long in this dynamic, you start losing track of where they end and you begin. So how do you know you're being drained? You feel tired after every conversation. You dread their messages, but feel guilty ignoring them. You feel responsible for their emotional weather. You can't remember the last time you were the one being comforted. You start craving distance, but feel like that makes you cold. This is not love. It's energetic dependency. And it will leave you hollow. The path forward? You must recognize that love cannot survive where your soul is being fed upon. You must reclaim your space, your energy, your right to be unavailable. Because the more you keep showing up just to keep the peace, the less of you remains. And if someone's affection only flows when you're available 24/7, then what they love isn't you, it's your access. Jung taught us that wholeness requires separation, a clear boundary between one soul and another. And when that boundary is missing, you don't have a relationship. You have emotional fusion, which may feel intimate, but is actually a slow death of the self. In the next part, we step back, to look not just at them, but at us. Because maybe, just maybe, the reason these dynamics repeat isn't that we're victims, but that part of us agreed to play the role. You thought you were helping. You thought you were loving. You thought you were being the bigger person. But lately, you feel small, exhausted, unclear where your needs went. You're not angry, not yet. You're just numb. And that numbness, it's a warning sign. It means you're no longer living your own life. You're living in someone else's shadow, trapped in roles you never chose, roles that were assigned to you by pain you didn't create. Here's what Jung understood better than anyone. The psyche doesn't always scream when something's wrong. Sometimes it silences you instead. You stop expressing your full truth. You hold your breath around certain people. You adjust who you are, just to keep the peace. And day by day, you become a character in someone else's story. Maybe it started subtly. You were the comforter, the forgiver, the one who never walked away. But slowly, that turned into being the one who always gives in, the one who absorbs, the one who tolerates too much. The strings that hold you in place, they're not visible. They're woven from guilt, from empathy, from trauma bonds and old survival patterns, and you don't even realize they're there until you try to move. Ever felt like you were betraying someone just by choosing yourself? That's not love. That's conditioning. It means your worth has been tied to sacrifice, that somewhere along the way you learned that being good means being gone. Gone from your boundaries, gone from your voice, gone from your center. The most dangerous, people Jung warned us about don't always control you with force. They do it with need, with unspoken contracts, with the kind of closeness that erases you over time. And the real tragedy? Sometimes you participate in your own erasure, because it feels safer than being alone. So what happens now? You stop asking, why do they treat me this way? And start asking, what part of me keeps staying in this role? What part of me believes I'm only lovable if I'm useful? What part of me fears being seen as selfish for finally choosing me? This isn't about blame. This is about sovereignty. You were never meant to carry what others refuse to face. You were never meant to shrink so others could expand. You were never meant to trade your essence for a place at someone else's table. The strings can be cut. But first, you have to see them. In the next part, we turn the mirror completely inward, not just to understand others, but to face the possibility that you too have played these roles, not out of malice, but out of unhealed wounds. And awareness is the beginning of freedom. You've made it this far. You've identified the manipulator, the masked, the repressed, the righteous, the fragmented, the draining. You've seen them all. But now, the mirror turns, and it asks, what if the person you're trying to avoid has lived inside you too? It's not a comfortable question, but it is a necessary one. Because Jung didn't create these archetypes to help us spot monsters in others. He created them to help us meet the unacknowledged within ourselves. And if you're truly honest, haven't there been moments you leaned on someone too hard? Not out of love, but out of fear of being alone. Moments you needed control. Not because you were wise, but because you were scared. Moments you wore a mask. Not to deceive, but because being real felt dangerous. This is not shame. This is awakening. Jung taught that the shadow is not evil. It is the parts of us we've exiled, the rage we weren't allowed to feel, the need we were told was weak, the ambition we buried under humility, the desire we silenced in the name of being good. And when we deny those parts, they don't vanish. They leak onto our lovers, our children, our friends, ourselves. So yes, maybe you've been drained, but maybe you've also drained others. Maybe you've projected, worn a mask, needed someone too much, or held someone hostage with your pain. This doesn't make you bad. It makes you human. The difference lies not in perfection, but in consciousness. Because the most dangerous thing about unconscious behavior is not what it does to others. It's what it prevents you from becoming. You were not born to live on autopilot, to play inherited roles, to reenact emotional loops from childhood, to love through guilt, or be loved through fear. You were born to see, to name, to interrupt the cycle. And maybe, just maybe, this entire journey hasn't been about avoiding others. It's been about reclaiming yourself. So ask, what archetype do I see in me? What role do I play when I feel unsafe? What truth have I been too afraid to face? Because freedom begins not when you run from the shadow, but when you dare to sit beside it and ask, what do you want me to know? In the next part, we gather everything. Not just what you've seen, but what you're now ready to change. Because awareness is not the end. It's the beginning of agency. Awareness is not enough. It's the doorway, not the destination. You can recognize the pattern, see the shadow, identify the projection, but until you name it, interrupt it, and reclaim yourself, you are still living inside the pattern's architecture. This is what Jung meant when he said, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. So many of us are walking through life carrying stories that don't belong to us. Roles we inherited, scripts we never wrote, masks we forgot to take off, and we call it just who I am. We call it love. We call it sacrifice. We call it strength. But, really, it's just unconscious loyalty to a false identity. The first act of freedom isn't walking away. It's naming what was once invisible. It's saying, this is not mine. This is not love. This is a wound disguised as connection. It's learning to separate between what is yours to carry and what was handed to you by someone too scared to face themselves. Think of every psychological thread like a contract. Some were signed in silence, some in childhood, some in trauma. But every contract can be rewritten when you become conscious, and consciousness begins with truth-telling, even if it's quiet, even if it's just to yourself. I've been abandoning myself to be loved. I've been performing peace to avoid being left. I've been choosing pain that feels familiar over peace that feels foreign. This is not weakness. This is the beginning of sovereignty. There is a reason the shadow hides. It fears annihilation, but what it really needs is integration. Not to be exiled, not to be obeyed, but to be seen, understood, and brought back into wholeness. That is how we stop being controlled by what we refuse to face. So if you've been cast in roles that hurt, if you've lived in someone else's emotional script, if you've seen yourself in the manipulator, the martyr, the mask wearer, here is your invitation. You are allowed to exit the performance. You are allowed to revise your role. You are allowed to say, that was me, but it no longer has to be. Because naming it is the first act of freedom. And in the next part, we'll explore what happens after awareness. When you begin choosing not from your pain, but from your presence. You've seen the roles. You've felt the weight of invisible contracts. You've stared into the mirror and whispered truths you once buried under kindness, compliance, fear. So now what? Do you watch the pattern repeat, but with new faces? Do you call it destiny when it knocks again? Soft, familiar, and wrong? Or do you break it? This is the invitation. To wake up not just in thought, but in action. Because awareness without courage is just spiritual entertainment. You can spend your whole life understanding people, forgiving them, analyzing yourself into exhaustion, and still be stuck in the exact same cycle. Nothing changes until something is interrupted, not outside, inside. The person who manipulates you doesn't stop because you understood their trauma. The one who drains you won't magically leave because you realize they're wounded. The mask doesn't fall off just because you read a Carl Jung quote. Change happens when you decide to stop playing the role, even if it's uncomfortable, even if you lose people, even if part of you still wants to be loved for playing small. And here's the hard truth. When you start waking up, you'll start disappointing people, because the version of you that fed their fantasy, held their wounds, absorbed their projections, will no longer exist. And some people don't want your truth. They want your compliance. Let them go. Jung didn't tell us to fix others. He invited us to become whole, and wholeness isn't perfection. It's the integration of all you are. The rage, the softness, the fear, the strength, the shadow, the light, the chaos, the clarity. When you begin to live from this integration, you stop seeking relationships that complete you, because you are no longer fragmented, and from that place, you make a new kind of choice. Not one based on trauma, need, fear of being alone, but one based on truth. So this is the question you must now answer. Will I stay inside the story, or will I start writing a new one? You already know what the loop feels like. You already know what repeating the pattern costs. The only thing you haven't experienced yet is what happens when you stop. In the final part, we'll bring everything full circle and leave you with one last reflection. Not about them, but about you, because this has never been about the people you meet. It's about who you become when you finally stop betraying yourself. You came here to understand others, to protect your peace, to finally name what always felt off, but never had words. And maybe you did. Maybe you saw them. The manipulator, the controller, the one who drains. Maybe you even saw faces, moments, memories. But the most important thing you saw was you. The parts of you that stayed too long. The silence you used to survive. The patterns you kept repeating because they felt like home. This was never about them. It was about everything you've done to not lose people, even when it meant losing yourself. Carl Jung said, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. But not anymore, because now you see it. The roles, the strings, the shadow, the places where your yes should have been no, the love that was really fear, the empathy that became self-erasure. And from this seeing, a quiet power is returning. You don't have to scream. You don't have to explain. You don't have to fix anyone. You just have to choose to stop abandoning yourself, to stop rehearsing pain, to start writing a life that actually feels like yours. If this video gave you language for something you've been carrying, if it named the silent grief you never knew how to speak, then leave a comment. Not for us, but for you. Because sometimes, naming it is how you begin to free it. And if you're ready to keep walking this path, slowly, truthfully, consciously, hit subscribe. Not just to a channel, but to your own awakening. Because this isn't the end. It's the first moment you saw clearly.